Thanks, Devin. And nice to see you folks that I've met already, and nice to meet the new folks that weren't here last time for our workshop. So I'll just take you through first what we heard both from our workshop and also from notes from your membership more generally. Some things that we took to be things that will guide us in our recommendations. So one is that wayfinding is actually important to your membership. We definitely felt like everybody wished things were in a better state, and that wayfinding itself is really important. Helping people find their way to retail areas, to amenities, and to other things within Wolfville is really important to everybody. There is definitely a desire to clean up sign pollution and to provide a simpler looking environment that helps people find their way by not cluttering their visuals with so many different choices. So making things look a little cleaner. It's not just an aesthetic choice, but it also makes people more relaxed and provides a more welcoming environment to not have a million different signs with a million different messages in the environment. Definitely there was some interest in improving the existing wayfinding standards that you've got, and that came down to really three things. One is the town's brand and the expression of that brand through signage. The other is the functionality of the signs, and there certainly are some improvements that could be made to the signs that you have now to make them more functional. And the third was the locations of those signs could be improved as well. They could be positioned differently to get better results. And one thing that we identified that was kind of the most important thing, that your existing wayfinding signs that you have do work very well for vehicles. They're positioned very high up. The text is large. They're not really pedestrian-oriented signs. It's not the kind of thing that people will know to look for at the corners of your main street, at the main decision points, if they're walking or if they're in a wheelchair or something else. These signs don't work all that well for those people. The other thing that came up, which was very interesting, was something that makes the connections between the Harvest Moon Trail, which has, from what I understand, incredible use this year due to COVID, like every trail and park everywhere in Nova Scotia, which is great. But because of that increased use of the Harvest Moon Trail, people really wanted to make those connections more obvious so that people know they can come into town, they know that there are amenities available to them. So to make those connections more obvious and more clear. So just what I said, it's an incredible asset with high use, and we want people to know that there's stuff off trail that they can use. So something like this was just a very simple sign we developed for Prince Edward County in Ontario to let people know, well, there's a picnic area that's just off the trail, or there's a retail space, or there are washrooms available to you. There was a bit of interest in inspirational signage, which was really interesting to us. This is less, for sure, a wayfinding thing and more of a signage or a graphic design thing in general, but still it's of interest to us. This is a project my colleague Margot Derling, who is our creative director and our head of brand at Fathom Studio, developed for downtown Dartmouth. These are inspirational statements that are plastered on building facades throughout downtown Dartmouth. They ended up working with all kinds of different business owners, building owners, to be able to just provide some inspirational messages for people during COVID. It's a brand building thing for downtown Dartmouth, but it's also a thing to help inspire folks that are walking around. And then there was some indication of need for temporary signage around the farmers market here to make the farmers market itself more obvious, so that people know that it's open, so that people know that it exists, and how to get there. And right now, even the facade of the building, as I'm sure you're all aware, doesn't do a great job of letting people know that there is a farmer's market. You've got that tiny little farmer's market sign, which is quite cute, and then the giant DeWolf sign up top. Certainly there are things that we could design to make that situation a little bit better. And it might not even be about facade signage, but even just something that indicates that there's a farmer's market that's open. Something at the street, could be something at Main Street in Elm that lets people know that it exists. So those were some of the top level things that we thought you identified and that we had suggested are worth considering. So here are our recommendations, and I've narrowed this down to 5 things that we can do right now to improve wayfinding and signage within Wolfville. We're not suggesting we can deal with all of those things, because some of those things are quite complicated, and we've got a kind of narrow scope and budget right now. So these are 5 things we can deal with within the existing scope. One is to design a flexible beacon sign. So this would be a pedestrian-oriented sign. This example is from the town of Yarmouth. These were actually installed. There were quite a few in Yarmouth, and from what I understand, they're working very well. There's you see the question mark up top, that's the beacon part. That's something that people can see from a distance to know that there's a sign up ahead that gives them useful information. And then the main face of that sign, which you see on the right, it has contextual information about the town. It's got maps telling people where things are. It's got a little bit of interpretive or marketing messaging to let people know, well, there's some history to this place. There's retail available here. There are things to do. And so those signs, we call them beacon signs, but they kind of have a kiosk-like function. It's lots of context to help people know what's available. So we're suggesting doing something like that. This was an alternative. This one is still in design for the city of St. John's. It's almost completed, but it's a similar kind of sign, much larger though. This is sort of the kind of thing that you might see in bigger cities like in Toronto or Boston or London, where it's like a big monument that comes up from the sidewalk, but similar information. It's got maps, it's got context, it's got interpretation. So that's suggestion 1. Suggestion 2 is to refit those existing kiosks that you have, the one in Roby Tufts and the one on Main Street at the bus stop there, to take those and to do something similar that we're suggesting for those beacon signs, but to do something that's customized for these kiosks. So to put some sign panels on these that will make them usable during their remaining lifespan. They probably don't have that much longer to go. We don't feel like they're going to be in place for another 20 years. They're likely to be replaced in the medium term, but something to make these really useful because their locations are good and the building structures are they're quite visible and useful the way they are. So just giving them useful information. We call that reskinning, which I realize is a horrible term, and I'm sorry, but that's what we call it, reskinning a structure or a sign. So our third recommendation is to design and place directional signs for pedestrians. So this is in addition to that beacon sign. We're not talking about providing context here, but we're talking about hitting people at those main decision points, let's say at Elm and Main Street, or Main and Gaspereau, maybe at Front and Central, to let people know if they make a right turn, what's there for them. So if you make a right turn at Main and Elm, you'll get to that farmer's market. You'll get to parking. This is for pedestrians in particular. So we're talking about a small sign, something like this, just arrows and destinations. So this isn't about context, this is just about direction. And these signs help people find their way to places that they already know they're looking for. Like, let's say if I'm looking for the library, hopefully the library is listed on this sign and it'll help me get there. But these signs also have the function of letting people know about things they didn't know already existed. So it does have a little bit of a marketing function too. These also would be quite appropriate at places where people change modes, like in parking lots, and at the access points for the harvest moon. So like that function I was talking about in the what we heard part of this presentation, these signs could help people know that there's stuff to do. If they just leave the trail and go straight, they'll get to a retail district or they'll get to a washroom. Number 4 is to look at this program that we did for downtown Dartmouth and to try and come up with a concept for how this might work out in Wolfville. So some inspirational statements, working with businesses and building owners and seeing how this might work out in your town. Obviously the statements might need to be different than in downtown Dartmouth, and the appearance certainly should be different, but there are ways we can take this and customize it for your place. And we asked downtown Dartmouth how they would feel about it, and they said they were quite keen to have that program replicated in other places. They had really no issue with the same thing or a similar thing being done somewhere else. And lastly, for number 5, we're suggesting to refresh this Roby Tufts interpretive signage in that structure. These interpretive signs, we would do something that conceptually matched what we were suggesting for what we will be suggesting for the beacon signs and for the directional signs. So whatever style we develop, something that also works for this facility, just to upgrade it. So that's number 5. So next steps, and this is really my last thing to discuss, very briefly, we really are just presenting these recommendations for your approval. So we're interested to hear what you think and whether you think these are the appropriate solutions. If you approve these recommendations, then we can move them to a concept design within the scope of this project. So within the budget we have remaining, we can develop a concept for all these things. It won't get you to built signs, but it certainly will get you to something that you can look at and weigh in on and provide feedback to. So, thank you.